What's up, guys? Golden Knight here. There is a feeling that every artist knows. You finish a drawing and then you look at the result, and instead of feeling satisfaction, you think, this looks horrible. What no one tells you is that this feeling usually has nothing to do with your technical level. People with years of study feel the same thing. Professional artists, people who make a living from art, all of them know this voice that says the work is not good enough. So if technique doesn't solve it, if time spent practicing doesn't solve it, what is happening? What you are going to understand throughout this video will change the way you look at your own work. I will show you what is really behind this chronic dissatisfaction, where it comes from, how it feeds itself, and why it persists even when you are clearly improving. External approval will never fill the space that internal validation should occupy. At some point in the journey of almost every artist today, there is a subtle shift that happens without you noticing. You start drawing for one reason, curiosity, pleasure, the need to express something, and at some point that changes, and you begin to draw with one eye on the work and the other on people's reactions. You post something and keep checking the likes. You share a piece and feel that specific anxiety while waiting for the comments. And when the response is good, when people praise it, when the numbers go up, you feel relieved. For a moment, the work seems good enough. But that moment passes quickly. And soon you are back in the same state as before, needing the next validation to feel that what you do has value. This cycle is dangerous not because external approval is bad in itself. Feedback is very valuable. Recognition is pleasant and natural to want. The problem is when external approval stops being a compliment and becomes the primary source of evaluation for your own work. When you can no longer know whether a drawing is good before seeing how people react to it. When your judgment about your own work is completely outsourced to an audience that does not know your process, does not know your intention, does not know what you were trying to solve when you made it. At that point, you have lost something fundamental. The ability to have a direct and honest relationship with your own work, without intermediaries. What makes this even more complicated is that external approval is inconsistent by nature. What resonates with people one day does not resonate the next. A piece you made with little care may generate a lot of engagement, while something you poured your heart into can pass completely unnoticed. Algorithms amplify this in ways that have nothing to do with quality. And if your sense of value about your own work is tied to these numbers, you are building your self-evaluation on a foundation that changes all the time for reasons completely outside your control. This creates a constant emotional instability around the act of creating, where you never know exactly how you will feel about your own work until you see how the world reacts to it. Internal validation is not arrogance. It is not believing that everything you do is perfect. It is the ability to look at your own work and have an opinion about it that does not depend exclusively on what others think. It is knowing what you were trying to do, evaluating whether you got there or not, understanding what worked and what can improve, and carrying that understanding regardless of how many people clicked like. Developing this takes time and requires that you practice asking yourself, before posting anything, what you think about the work. Not what you hope others will think. What you think. And learning to trust that answer, even when it does not match the world's response, is one of the most liberating moves an artist can make. The distance between what you see in your head and what appears on the paper. There is a phenomenon that happens to every artist. Before you draw anything, there is an image in your head, but when you pick up the pencil and start working, what appears on the paper is never exactly that. Never. There is always a distance between the internal image and the external result, and it is in that distance that much of your dissatisfaction lives. That distance exists because your ability to perceive and imagine develops at a completely different pace from your ability to execute. You can see certain details long before you are able to reproduce them with your hands. This means that the more you study, the more you look at incredible work, the more your eye becomes educated, the greater the distance tends to be between what you imagine and what you are able to do. The evolution of your taste moves ahead of the evolution of your hand. And this creates a permanent feeling of delay, of insufficiency, of always running after something that retreats at the same speed that you advance. If you do not understand what is happening, this becomes a constant source of suffering. This is one of the reasons why very skilled artists still feel that their work is not good enough. It is not a lack of technique. It is that the internal standard continues to grow, continues to demand more, continues to point towards something beyond what the hands are still able to deliver. Why your brain ignores evolution and focuses only on what is missing. If you take a drawing you made 2 years ago and compare it with something you made recently, it is very likely that you can clearly see that you have improved, even if only a little. But in day-to-day life, while you are practicing, that evolution is completely invisible. You do not feel like you are improving. You feel like you are always in the same place, always struggling with the same problems. The brain has an attention system that is naturally oriented toward problems. This exists for evolutionary reasons. A brain that ignores threats and difficulties in favor of comfort and satisfaction is a brain that does not survive. So what has been selected over thousands of years of evolution is exactly a system that detects what is wrong, what is missing, what represents risk or inadequacy, with far more efficiency than it detects what is right, what improved, what has already been achieved. When you look at a drawing, your brain does not make a balanced analysis. It goes straight to the problems. And the problems seem enormous, urgent, central, while the successes remain invisible, as if they were only the minimum expected. This creates a real distortion in your perception of progress. You learn to draw hands with more confidence, and immediately your brain stops registering hands as a problem and starts focusing on feet, which now seem to be the greatest obstacle in the world. You solve the feet and the focus moves to facial expressions. Some people never lose focus on the feet, if you know what I mean. Each achievement disappears from the map as soon as it is reached, and what remains is always the set of things that have not yet been resolved. The result of this experience is that you never feel like you have improved, even when you have improved a lot, because your attention system is constantly reallocating the focus to the next problem to solve. What makes this even heavier is that this mechanism does not have a natural point of arrival. There is no moment when the brain says, "Now it is good, now you can relax, now you can feel satisfaction." Because there is always something that can be better, more refined, more resolved. Artists who do not develop a conscious practice of recognizing and recording their own progress get trapped in this cycle indefinitely. The comparison with artists who are at a point in the journey that you have not yet reached. Never in human history has it been so easy to have access to the work of the best artists in the world. At any moment of the day, you can open Instagram, ArtStation, Pinterest, and in seconds you are seeing cinematic-level illustrations, AAA game concept art, portraits with a realism that looks like photography, characters that seem to breathe. This access is extraordinary in many ways. But it has also created a psychological environment that can be extremely bad for people who are learning, and most people do not realize the effect this has on the way they see their own work. The problem is not seeing incredible work. The problem is seeing these works and wanting to compare yourself without any context about the journey that existed behind them. When you see a stunning illustration from an artist with 15 years of daily practice, you are seeing the result of 15 years of mistakes, studies, frustrations, restarts, drawings that the artist himself hated, entire phases where he also thought he would never get anywhere. But you do not see any of that. You see only the final result. And then you compare that artist with where you are now, which may be your second year of practice, or your fifth, and the distance seems infinite. It seems like there is a barrier between you and that level that is not only about time and practice, but about talent, about ability, about something fundamental that you simply do not have. This comparison is structurally unfair, but the brain does not process it as unfair. It processes it as evidence that you are not good enough. Evidence that your work is mediocre. Evidence that maybe you will never get there. And the worst part is that the more you execute this loop of comparing yourself in the wrong way with more experienced artists, the more this pattern solidifies. Your reference for quality becomes calibrated by the absolute top of what exists, and anything below that, including technically very good work, begins to seem insufficient. You develop a taste that is permanently years ahead of your execution, and you start to use that taste not as motivation, but as an instrument of judgment against yourself. There is a fundamental difference between using references to learn and using references to compare yourself. When you use an incredible piece of work as study, it serves you. It feeds you. But when you use that same work as a mirror to measure how much you still are not, it paralyzes you. The same artist, the same work, can be fuel or poison depending on the relationship you establish with it. What happens when you confuse healthy self-criticism with disguised self-punishment? Healthy self-criticism exists and is necessary. It is what allows you to look at a piece of work and identify what is not working with honesty. It is precise, it is directed, and it points to something that can be done differently. It looks at the work with the objective of understanding and improving. But there is another state that looks very much like self-criticism, and that is actually completely different. It is self-punishment. And the difference between the two is not in the intensity of the judgment, but in its direction. Self-punishment does not look at the work. It looks at you. It does not say that this specific line is not working and needs to be redone. It says that you are not good enough. It does not identify a technical problem that needs to be solved. It confirms a narrative about your identity as an artist, about your value, about whether you have or do not have what it takes to get where you want to go. And knowing how to differentiate these two behaviors is very important because self-criticism puts you in motion. It gives you a concrete problem to solve, while self-punishment paralyzes you, because there is no solution for not being good enough as a person. You cannot fix yourself in the same way you fix a wrong proportion. The problem is that these two states often mix in a way that is difficult to separate in practice. You start by looking at a real technical problem, and at some point the analysis slips into personal judgment, and you do not even notice when that happened. The study session that began as an investigation turns into a confirmation of inadequacy. And then you close the sketchbook with that familiar feeling of weight, that feeling that no matter how much you practice, something will always be missing. Not because the work was objectively bad, but because you stopped evaluating the work and started using the work to evaluate yourself. Learning to notice that moment, to recognize when the criticism stopped being about the drawing and became about you, is one of the most important skills an artist can develop, and it is a skill not taught in any art course. The illusion that there is a level where drawings will finally seem good enough. At some point in your journey as an artist, you created a mental image of a point of arrival. It is that imaginary level where your drawings will finally seem good, where you will finish a piece and feel satisfaction instead of disappointment, where the voice that says it is not good enough will finally go silent. This point of arrival may have a concrete form in your head. The problem with this image is that it does not exist. Not in the way you imagine. Because the satisfaction you are waiting for is not tied to a technical level. It will not automatically appear when you learn to draw hands perfectly or when you master perspective. Artists who reach these points and continue feeling that their work is not good enough discover that chronic dissatisfaction is not a symptom of insufficient skill. It is a pattern of relationship with one's own work that does not change on its own just because skill increased. There is well-established research in psychology about a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. Basically, human beings have a tendency to return to a baseline level of satisfaction regardless of what they gain or lose. You achieve something that you thought would make you happy, and after some time that becomes the new normal, and you are back in the same state as before, looking for the next thing that will finally fix everything. This happens with money, with relationships, with status, and it happens in exactly the same way with artistic skill. The level that today seems unreachable, the level you imagine will bring satisfaction when you reach it, will become your new starting point. And from there, what will seem unreachable is the next level above it. This does not mean that seeking evolution is useless. It means that if you are waiting for technical evolution to solve emotional dissatisfaction, you are waiting for the wrong thing. The path to feeling better about your own work does not go through getting better at the work. It goes through actively changing the way you relate to the process, to the result, and to the standard you use to evaluate what you do. Artists who find some peace with their own work are not artists who reached some magical point of technical perfection. They are artists who, at some moment, stopped postponing satisfaction to a hypothetical future and started finding real value in what they are doing now, at the stage they are in, with the limitations that still exist. This change does not happen by accident. It requires a conscious and repeated decision to look at the work in a different way. How an undefined style creates a permanent feeling that something is missing. There is a specific discomfort that many artists carry for years. It is not exactly the feeling that the drawing turned out technically bad. It is the feeling that the work does not look like yours, that it could have been made by anyone, that something is missing that would transform it into something recognizable, into something with identity, into something that when someone saw it they would immediately know it came from you. Style is not a decorative layer that you add on top of technique when you reach a certain level. It is not an aesthetic choice that you make one day after having mastered enough. Style is the sum of all your preferences, influences, obsessions, fears, limitations, and choices accumulated over time. It emerges naturally when you stop trying to make your work look like the work of other people and begin making choices based on what genuinely resonates with you. But this is harder than it seems, because during years of learning, you are taught to copy, to study references, to replicate what works in the artists you admire. And this is necessary. But at some point, if you never make the transition from replicating to filtering, from absorbing to expressing, the work continues to look like a shadow of other things, never completely yours. The great trap is that many artists spend years believing that style will appear by itself when technique is good enough. So they continue studying, continue practicing, continue dedicating themselves to the technical foundation, waiting for the moment when a personal voice will naturally emerge from this process. And sometimes that happens partially. But most of the time what emerges is competence without direction. You can draw well, but you do not know exactly what you want to say with it. You do not know what kind of work you want to make, what emotions you want to create, what visual world you want to inhabit. And then every finished drawing brings that familiar feeling that something is missing, even when technically it is solid, because technique without expressive intention is a tool without a clear purpose. Developing a style is not a linear process and does not have an exact method. But it begins when you stop asking how to make things look good and start asking what you really want to make. When you begin making decisions based on genuine preference instead of external approval. When you allow your current limitations to be part of the work instead of treating them as problems to hide. The journey needs to be your focus. Everything that has been said so far points in the same direction. Chronic dissatisfaction with your own work is not a technical problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is not a problem that will be solved when you learn more, practice more, or reach some imaginary level that you have not yet achieved. It is a problem of orientation. It is about where you are placing the center of value in your practice, and while that center is in the future, in some hypothetical point of arrival, you will continue living in a permanent state of insufficiency, because the present will always seem like the place where you are still not what you need to be. The deepest change an artist can make is not in the sketchbook. It is in the question he asks before opening the sketchbook. If the question is how do I get better, the focus is on the future, on the gap between where you are and where you want to go, and every session becomes a measurement of how much distance you still have to cover. But if the question is what do I want to explore today, the focus is on the present, on the process itself, on the investigation, on the conversation between you and the work. This does not mean abandoning ambition. It does not mean stopping wanting to grow, to seek better references, to challenge yourself with more complex problems. It means understanding that growth is not the purpose of the process. It is a byproduct of it. When you are genuinely present in what you are doing, when you are exploring with real curiosity instead of executing with anxiety, growth happens naturally, in a deeper and more lasting way than when you are trying to force it. The artists who look back and feel that they evolved significantly are rarely the ones who tortured themselves the most along the way. They are the ones who found a way to keep moving long enough because the process itself had value for them, not only the result. If this video helped you in any way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Don't forget to take a look at the description. There are several important links there that can help you even more. See you in the next video.